The 2022 Champions League fixtures have wrapped up and we have got our final 8 teams. So let's talk about it. This is how our last 8 teams look like. Roma in there is actually a debut. It's making a debut in the quarterfinals. In fact, this was their debut campaign in the Champions League. So whatever you saw in the group stages was the first time that they were in the group stages, and I would say it was quite impressive. They're also marking the 55th European club to have a campaign in the Champions League, which is kind of a crazy number to think about, that we've had 55 different European clubs in the Champions League. The last match day featured the most amount of goals in a match day, but I will have to say it was probably not the most intense, purely because some of these teams didn't have much on the line. The only high-stakes game we had was Juve versus Lyon, which we will dive into later. But usually there is more on the line on the last match day. So the sheer amount of goals that we saw, I think, purely came down to the fact that some of these teams knew were already going home and there wasn't really much to fight for. If you had asked the majority of people when these groups were put together, did you think Arsenal was going to top the table? And I guarantee you the majority of people probably said no. For them to crash again in the quarterfinals, have a pretty underwhelming performance in both legs really against Wolfsburg last season, to finish on top of the table and have had that spectacular performance against Lyon, the 5-1 win, is a statement. Topping the table regularly builds a lot of momentum. It also means that the second leg in the quarterfinals would be at home for you, which many see it as an advantage. I certainly do. And so whoever they draw, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they're able to continue that momentum. They haven't gone past the quarterfinals since 2013, so it's been a minute since they've seen the word semifinals in the Champions League, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how Arsenal is able to kind of build on that momentum, keep it going, and see if they can kind of break new barriers coming in the season. Obviously, the elephant in the room is the ACL injuries that they're dealing with, and I think we'll be able to have a better conversation about this once the January window is concluded, or at least once they draw the teams who they're going to play against. There's a lot of talks, there's a lot of players being connected directly to Arsenal, but I think it's hard to say or speculate or really have a concrete idea of how the squad's going to look like until that January window is closed. Behind them were Lyon, who actually kind of had the chance of not making it through. They themselves aren't in an injury crisis, but I don't think we have seen that killer instinct, that kind of terrifying Lyon force. And I want to say that was pretty boldly clear in the game against Juve. It's understandable that all they needed was to avoid losing to go through, but they set up very negatively. They set up very flat-footed. It was almost like they were there just to hold a draw. It seems like to be a lack of confidence. They had just lost to PSG on the weekend, but won against Arsenal, and I was like, you know what, maybe they can build on that confidence a little bit, build on that momentum, but they looked so flat-footed in terms of it's not the dominant Lyon that we know. Now, don't get me wrong, they produced chances and they defended well and ultimately held Juve to a draw, and that's exactly what they needed to go through. So from a Lyon perspective point of view, they did what they needed to go through. And even if they had won against Juve, with Arsenal beating Zurich the way they did, they were still not going to top the table. But I think going into the quarterfinal draw, you wanted teams to fear you. In fact, when I was scrolling through social media and Twitter, a lot of these fans were like, you know what, I want to draw Lyon, which is absolutely bizarre, because had this conversation been had last year where people are like, I want to go against Lyon. Yeah, I want to draw Lyon. Understandably, slowly but surely, we're going to start to see these injuries return. Ellie Carpenter is already back in training, and I assume we're definitely going to see her in at least the second game of the quarterfinals. The January window is also coming up, and so it's important not to get fooled based on the recency effect of what we've seen with Lyon. But did they leave in a very dominant fashion? No. Did I think that was a smart setup the way they did against Juve? Not exactly. And speaking of Juve, they actually, from the teams going back home, they've conceded the least amount of goals. Only 3 goals. They drew Lyon twice, they drew with Arsenal, had a narrow 1-0 loss, and obviously won the 2-0 games. But did it look like Juve was playing as a team who needed to win to go through? Not really. This goes back to Joe Montenegro. We've seen this previously with him at Arsenal, where he is lacking that kind of like snap of like doing something crazy on the field. And even if they are committing super high, they're pressing really high, their lines are just way up high in the field, and Lyon catch them in a counter and score, I wouldn't mind that, because you could at least say that they looked like they were fighting. They looked like a team who wanted and needed to win to go through. However, I do think this is great learning lessons for them. They are a rookie team. I think I need to remind people that they were only founded and have been competing the level that they're competing at since 2018. This is nothing. This is brand new. Last season, I think they had a brilliant run in the group stages and in the quarterfinal. And this time around, I think the fact that they got matched with both Arsenal and Lyon is going to give plenty of experience. And so this isn't kind of like they crashed early. I don't think they crashed early. I think this is really good lessons that it will benefit them greatly in the upcoming seasons. Zurich scored twice against Arsenal, really didn't have much to offer against any of the teams, unfortunately. But they scored against Arsenal twice, so I guess not many people can say that they did. With Group D, we had Barcelona finishing first and Bayern being the runner-ups. It was a really group fun to watch, despite the few games that Barcelona decided to have an absolute battering against their opponents. Benfica and Chloe Lacasse, I mean, the grit that they were playing with, 2 against Barcelona, and literally almost, beat Bayern, which would have turned this group from its head to toe. Bayern finishing in second. I think a lot of people are sleeping on them, and that midfield continues to be so damn good, so damn smooth. Once they dictate the pace, once they are the ones kind of literally puppy playing with the game, there's no way you take it out from them. And I think that's something that's really important with Bayern, is that once they have control of it, they're not a team that seems to lose it. And when you see that in the group stages, imagine what they can do with that mentality in the quarterfinals. And so with whoever they get matched up with, it's going to be really interesting. I would actually really enjoy a little Wolfsburg Bayern in the quarterfinals, but who doesn't love a German showdown? I mean, hell yeah. Barcelona, the only loss that they had was against Bayern, and that kind of probably was the only competition that was offered to them. And there was a lot of questions on the defense and possibly getting a little bit active and maybe recruiting another backup goalkeeper or a solid defender in the January window. On Abatier, the Manchester United player, has been heavily linked with Barcelona. Obviously, she's a Spanish player. She grew up in the Barcelona youth system. If they're able to get her, that really is the last bit of their sharp arsenal in the defense, because midfielder wise, I think they've got it locked in. Up front, I mean, the amount of talent that they have, both young and kind of those veterans, is just it's unreal. I would love to see them go at it against Lyon in the quarterfinals. I think a 2-legged game between those two after what we had seen in the final would be really, really interesting. That is a quarterfinal that I'm hoping gets drawn. In Group B, Wolfsburg and Roma topped the table. Wolfsburg did not lose a single game, but they did have 2 draws, once against Roma and once against Slavia Praha, which, if you haven't watched the highlights for that game, please do yourself a favor and do watch it, because just go for it. To put it into context, Wolfsburg had 34 shots, 16 of which were on target and 16 of which were saved. Like, you're in for a complete goalkeeper masterclass, that game was. St. Poland won their game against Slavia Praha in the last minute, scoring their first ever away goal by an Austrian team. And so a little bit of history in there, you could see how happy they got. I mean, it literally was a last minute goal, and it was a good goal. Both of the teams didn't really threaten Roma or Wolfsburg too much. Wolfsburg, obviously home to the current highest goal scorer in the competition, Bajor, I mean, she has been on fire. You could really say one of the most on-form strikers in the current game, because not only has she had that form in the Champions League, but she's kept it nice and smooth running also in the Bundesliga. Not only is she able to contribute to scoring, but she assists, she pulls fouls. I mean, she off the ball and on the ball has been spectacular. And this is really positive for her. I mean, she has had a very unfortunate run of injuries, knee injuries. Whenever she comes in, she gets injured and hasn't really been able to pick up any minutes. And the fact that she's finally healthy, finally able to, play within that bunch and prove herself, it's massive for the Polish player. It's honestly, I'm really happy to see her do as good as she's been doing. They did lose Jill Roord, and I really hope she has a fast recovery and is back in it, because she is a prominent role in Wolfsburg. But with how deep and strong their bench is, they haven't really struggled with that. And that's because they're able to bring on names like Brand and Jonsdottir and Vasmuth. It's like, those names could easily start in any starting 11 and any team you put them in. And so to be able to put them as a backup for Jill Roord, they won't be struggling. Roma, 3 clean sheets, 16 goals. Not only are they able to finish up top, but they can kind of keep a good defensive side on the end. Bartoli, Valentina, they're so good with switching the play, playing diagonally in the middle. They've shown to be very threatening on counterattacks, and that's always such an important factor to go moving forward, because all you need is one counterattack, one loose ball, and boom, you could be 1-0 up. Alves in the middle, so physical, so strong. Really impressive stuff, and I'm very, very interested to see how they're going to do in the quarterfinals. They're likely not going to go past it, but for a first-time campaign, they're doing some pretty damn good work. Group A, I mean, what a statement that is by Chelsea, to crashing out early last season and now topping a very tough group. That talks. Not just that, but they've collected the most amount of points from any of those teams, and they've also conceded the least amount of goals. Only a single goal, which really was kind of like a miscommunication in the back. It wasn't a goal that they conceded from a set piece or an open play or a cross or a tap in. Nope, just simple miscommunication. Well, not really simple, but miscommunication in the back. What they have done in the summer transfer window talks about rotation. It talks about keeping players healthy, talks about being able to bring backup quality players for maybe the primary ones that aren't able to deliver. That first leg against Real Madrid and that second leg against PSG, I mean, they made those teams look amateur teams. One thing that separated them from a lot of these European teams, and specifically those two that we just mentioned, is the relentless amount of pressure that they put in any way, shape, or form. It could be as silly as throwing like Millie Bright up top, just like these crazy ideas that somehow they come up with mid-game. You don't know what's going on. And then just like that, pressure is applied, 2 or 3 shots in, boom, goal. And let's talk about Sophie Ingle. I think she surprised a lot of people with starting ahead of a few players, probably surprised a few people with the amount of minutes that she's getting, but she has been such a stabilizing role in that midfield. I think her and Aaron Cuthbert are playing really well together. Not necessarily that link-up play between, passing the ball or whatever, but just the way they pivot together and the way they move. She knows where Aaron is going, so she knows what she's doing. That kind of nice and flowy communication, really, really nice. PSG, I know I just mentioned they had a poor second leg against Chelsea, and it's because they had a fair amount of notably missing players. Jackie Gronin, Ashley Lawrence, a huge miss. And with PSG, I still see that they're kind of struggling to find a striker. Diani usually plays with somebody up front. She's trying to play more centrally, and Baltimore kind of is there to adjust her role. But that miss of Katoto, I don't think they've adapted just yet. I don't think they've been able to figure out how Lika Martins and Baltimore and, say, Diani are able to combine together. There are speculations that they're looking for a striker in the January window. I don't think that's a terrible idea, but if they're bringing in somebody, they need to understand what role they're going to take on, because they have the talent and they have those players up top. It's just combining them together, molding them together hasn't really shown to work. Guillaume, Jean-François, really impressive stuff. I think Guillaume always bosses the midfield, but so seeing how Jean-François has been growing is really, really fun. Now for Madrid, it's kind of a similar story of Juve, that they simply ended up in a very tough group. Again, we must not forget the fact that they're slightly new into this game. Last season, when they made it into the quarterfinals, that was the first time that they had gone that far into the competition. They have a similar story of Juve, is that they're kind of new into this, and they did very well last season, and this season would be more of a learning lesson more than anything. They have that good midfield, but are struggling to connect that midfield with the forwards, and the forwards are struggling to finish off the final third. You have those two disconnects, which is really hurting the game. That was something that was clearly exposed here. And unlike the other teams, I don't think this is a January window problem. I think this is more of figuring out how to set up the team better and how to expose other teams, because in some of these games, you could tell that there are certain spaces that they were not exploiting, or certain players that they were not necessarily boxing as much. And I feel it comes down more to the game plan, more to how that analysis is happening before they step on the pitch. Vllaznia also being the first ever Albanian team, men's or women's, to play in the Champions League. They scored finally their first goal in the competition. Again, big stuff for Vllaznia. They don't really get challenged in their league at all. If you take a look at how their points are distributed, you will be utterly shocked. Let me know which was your favorite. Let me know who impressed you best, who underachieved, who you think is going to crash early. There's so many conversations to have about this. I'm sure we'll do a preview when these draws happen. Also, try to hit the subscribe button. We're trying to hit 500 by the end of the year, so let's make it happen. As always, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter, and I will see you later.